is online radio?
The most greatest thing in the universe. Okay, online radio is where you can go on the internet on this thingamajig called a computer. If you go into the computer, there are like 3 main sites you can visit to. Well, 2 for me.
Don't say Pandora.
Pandora.
Don't say Pandora. I'm Travis.
I'm DJ.
And for those of you watching today, we have a few questions.
First off, you love radio.
Do you often find yourself listening to your favorite radio show and wondering just how it is they do their job?
Us too!
Have you ever wanted to host a show of your own?
If so, then we're here to help you set up your own online radio show. How cool is that?
Before we get into the stuff that you need and all that jazz, let's take a look at the state of radio industry in recent years and also the advantages of online radio. After 1920, large corporations come to dominate the industry. In 1919, Frank Conrad, a Westinghouse engineer, began broadcasting music in Pittsburgh. These broadcasts stimulated the sale of crystal sets. A crystal set, which could be made at home, was composed of a tuning coil, a crystal detector, and a pair of earphones. The use of a crystal eliminated the need for a battery or other electric source. The popularity of Conrad's broadcast led to Westinghouse establishing a radio station, KDKA, on November 2, 1920. In 1921, KDKA began broadcasting prize fights in Major League Baseball. While Conrad was creating KDKA, the Detroit News established a radio station. Other newspapers soon followed the Detroit newspaper's lead.
The Radio Corporation of America, RCA, was the government-sanctioned radio monopoly formed to replace Marconi's American company. Later, a government that had once considered making radio a government monopoly followed a policy of promoting competition in the radio industry. RCA was owned by a GE-dominated partnership that included Westinghouse, American Telegraph and Telephone Company, Western Electric, United Fruit Company, and others. There were cross-licensing agreements, patent pooling agreements between GE, AT&T, Westinghouse, and RCA, which owned the assets of Marconi's company. Patent pooling was a solution to the problem of each company owning some essential patents. For many years, RCA and its head, David Sarnoff, were virtual synonyms. Sarnoff, who began his career in radio as a Marconi office boy, gained fame as a wireless operator and showed the great value of radio when he picked up distress messages from the sinking Titanic. Ultimately, RCA expanded into nearly every area of communications and electronics. Its extensive patent holdings gave it power over most competitions because they had to pay it royalties. While still working for Marconi, Sarnoff had the foresight to realize that the real money in the radio lay in selling radio receivers. Because the market was smaller, radio transmitters generated smaller revenues. Marconi was able to charge people for transmitting messages for them, but how was radio broadcasting to be financed? In Europe, the government financed it. In this country, it soon came to be largely financed by advertising. In 1922, few stations sold advertising time. Then the motive of many operating radio stations was to advertise other businesses they owned, or to get publicity. About a quarter of the nation's 500 stations were owned by manufacturers, retailers, and other businesses. Another quarter were owned by radio-related firms, educational institutions, radio clubs, civic groups, churches, government, and the military owned 40% of the station. Radio manufacturers viewed broadcasting simply as a way to sell radios. Over its first 3 years of selling radios, RCA's revenues amounted to about $83 million. By 1930, 9 out of 10 broadcasting stations were selling advertising time. In 1939, more than a third of the stations lost money, however, by the end of World War II. Only 5% were still in the red. Stations' advertising revenues came both from local and national advertisers after networks were established in 1938. 40% of the nation's 660 stations were affiliated with a network, and many were part of a chain. On September 25th, in 1926, RCA formed the National Broadcasting Company, NBC, to take over its network broadcasting business. In early 1927, only 7% of the nation's 737 radio stations were affiliated with NBC. In that year, a rival network, whose name eventually became the Columbian Broadcasting System, CBS, was established. In 1934, the Mutual Broadcasting System was formed. Unlike NBC and CBS, it did not move into television. In 1943, Federal Communications Commission forced NBC to sell a part of its system to Edward J. Noble, who formed the American Broadcasting Company, ABC. To avoid high costs of producing radio shows, local radio stations got most of their shows other than news from networks, which enjoyed economies of scale in producing radio programs because their costs were spread over the many stations using their programming.
Radio broadcasting was the cheapest form of entertainment, and it provided the public with far better entertainment than most people were accustomed to. As a result, its popularity grew rapidly in the late 1920s and early 1930s, and by 1934, 60% of the nation's households had radios. The 1930s were the golden age of radio. It was so popular that theaters dared not open until after the extremely popular Amos and Andy show was over.
Online radio streaming was born in the 90s as a solution for the music industry to reinvent itself, or as a solution for activists. WXYC is the first traditional radio station to announce broadcasting on the internet. Online radio can be a terrestrial radio station that broadcasts to a bigger market, or an independent internet-only operator that's just starting. Web radio stations are a good solution for new markets, delivering independent music that listeners can't hear on regular radio. Therefore, internet radio can be an alternative to terrestrial radio for people that want something else than the corporate and standardized radio.
Alright, now that you know a little bit about the radio industry and why online radio is relevant, we get to go to the fun part. We're going to teach you how to host an online radio show of your very own.
Step 1. Find a name for your show. You can't possibly expect people to listen to your show if it has no name. Also, it may be smart to think about what you're going to talk about, etc., etc. Step 2. Get on your computer and download Winamp. You absolutely need this in order to stream your show. Step 3. Go to freestreamhosting.org and make an account. This is absolutely necessary for people to be able to see and hear your show. Step 4. Register your login info into your Winamp and hit connect. From here, you can stream your music directly from the player. Step 5. Organize your show and have fun.